Kalos is a region filled with beauty, mystery, and some of the most elusive Pokémon trainers have ever encountered. Unlike other regions, the challenge of catching these rare creatures isn't just about strength, but also about patience, timing, and sometimes sheer luck. Some can only be found after long journeys, others demand mastery of specific conditions, and a few are locked behind mysteries that tested players for years. This is the story of the hardest Pokémon to catch in Kalos. One of the most legendary encounters waiting in Kalos hides inside the unknown dungeon, a place that feels as if it was built to test the patience and determination of even the most seasoned trainers. At the center of this cave rests Mewtwo, a figure known across generations for its overwhelming strength and near mythical status. The moment a trainer steps inside and sees the solitary figure standing silently in the shadows, the tone shifts from casual exploration to something far more serious. This is not a typical wild encounter. It feels like a challenge from the very core of the Pokémon world, and everything about the setting reinforces that sense of weight. The dungeon itself plays a role in amplifying the difficulty. To even reach the chamber where the creature waits, a player must first navigate through a winding cave that demands careful exploration. The wild Pokémon encountered along the way are strong and numerous, wearing down teams that aren't properly prepared. Potions, revives, and full restores often become necessities, and the psychological effect of conserving resources for the final confrontation adds to the tension. Unlike many other encounters, this one doesn't let players casually stroll in and test their luck. It demands a level of planning that makes the eventual battle all the more nerve-wracking. When the encounter finally begins, the sheer presence of the opponent is enough to unsettle most trainers. Its level is high, placing it well above the majority of Pokémon available in the region, and its stats are tuned for dominance. Speed ensures it often strikes first, while its special attack can devastate nearly any foe that dares to face it. Moves like Psychic, Aura Sphere, and even coverage options leave little room for error. A team that isn't carefully balanced can be wiped out in just a few turns, forcing an unceremonious trip back to the Pokémon Center before another attempt. The real challenge, however, lies not only in surviving the encounter, but in actually catching it. Even after its health is chipped away, status conditions are applied, and the stage is seemingly set for capture. The struggle has only just begun. Pokeballs rattle in vain, snapping open after the second or third shake, crushing the hopes of the trainer holding the device. Ultra Balls, Dusk Balls, used within the Dark Cavern, and Timer Balls, after prolonged battles, all increase the odds, but no matter the preparation, failure feels inevitable at times. The battle stretches on, and the threat of running out of Pokeballs or seeing the creature faint looms over every turn. For many, the Master Ball feels like the only sure solution, yet countless trainers hesitate to use it here, wanting instead the satisfaction of proving they could succeed without resorting to a guaranteed catch. This decision transforms the encounter into a trial of endurance, reset after reset, attempt after attempt. The unknown dungeon becomes a place of repetition, each try carrying the same mix of tension and frustration. But those who persist know that the payoff is worth every failed attempt. What makes this encounter even more meaningful in Kalos is the introduction of Mega Evolution. With the right stone, the creature can transform into two separate Mega forms, each emphasizing a different aspect of its overwhelming power. This detail adds narrative weight to the capture. It's not just about adding another strong Pokémon to the roster, It's about securing one of the most versatile and dangerous beings the franchise has ever offered. The thought that this legendary figure can reshape itself into two separate apex predators makes the battle feel even more daunting. Beyond the raw mechanics, there's also a symbolic aspect to catching it. In many ways, this creature embodies the ultimate test of a trainer's skill, patience, and perseverance. From the moment it first appeared in earlier generations, it has carried the aura of an untouchable legend. Its presence in Kalos keeps that tradition alive, reminding players of the legacy it has held for decades. Capturing it is not only about power, it's about proving oneself worthy of claiming one of the greatest prizes in the Pokémon universe. Even for players who know exactly what to expect, the encounter never loses its impact. The hushed silence of the cave, the imposing stance of the opponent, the tense music that builds as the battle unfolds, all of it combines to create a memory that lingers long after the game is over. Many trainers recall the countless times the Pokeball shook 3 times before clicking open, only for the battle to continue when it snapped apart. Others remember the triumphant rush of adrenaline when the words "Gotcha" finally appeared, signaling the end of a struggle that may have taken hours. The unknown dungeon encounter serves as a reminder of why legendary battles hold such a special place in the series. They are more than just stat checks or rare opportunities. They are stories in themselves, shared among players who all face the same frustrations and eventual triumph. In Kalos, that legacy continued with one of the most recognizable figures in the Pokémon franchise. To this day, the capture remains one of the highlights of exploring the region, cementing its place as one of the hardest and most memorable Pokémon to catch. Among the legendary bird trio, Zapdos stands as one of the most elusive and challenging to obtain in Kalos. The process of finding it isn't straightforward, nor is it something a player can simply stumble upon by accident. Instead, it is tied to which starter the trainer originally selected at the beginning of their journey. Choosing Froakie determines that the legendary bird tied to electricity will appear. This small decision early in the game quietly shapes the post-game hunt, setting the stage for one of the most drawn-out pursuits in the region. The first sight of the bird is brief, almost teasing. After defeating the Pokémon League and being crowned champion, a new encounter becomes possible. As players wander through the grass of Kalos, this winged figure may suddenly appear, only to flee immediately before a battle can even begin. There is no opportunity to fight, no chance to throw a Pokeball, just a fleeting glimpse of yellow feathers streaking across the screen. This mechanic is what makes the hunt so grueling. It's not a traditional legendary encounter where the player can head to a single location and prepare for an epic battle. Instead, it becomes a chase, stretching across dozens of hours of gameplay. To truly track down this legendary, players must see it a total of 10 times across the overworld. Each encounter is random, appearing in different routes throughout Kalos. The frustration comes from the unpredictability of these sightings. Trainers can wander for hours without spotting it, and when it finally appears, the fleeting moment offers no progress beyond another tally toward the necessary total. It's a test of patience, endurance, and perseverance. For players who dislike grinding or repetitive gameplay, this quest often becomes one of the most exhausting challenges the region has to offer. Only after it has been seen 10 separate times does the true battle unlock. The legendary bird then retreats to the Sea Spirit's Den, a remote location that feels fitting for such a powerful creature. Even reaching this final area requires determination, as it lies deep in Azure Bay, adding yet another step to the already lengthy process. By the time a trainer arrives at the den, the anticipation is nearly unbearable. This isn't just about catching a legendary, it's about the culmination of a chase that has lasted for hours upon hours of wandering the region. The battle itself does not disappoint. With its electric and flying typing, the legendary bird presents a unique set of challenges. Its speed allows it to strike quickly, often outspeeding most of the team. Powerful moves like Thunderbolt and Drill Peck can devastate unprepared opponents, and its defensive typing limits the number of safe switch-ins a trainer has available. Chipping down its health without accidentally knocking it out requires careful planning. Pokémon that can inflict paralysis or sleep become invaluable, yet even then, the capture is far from guaranteed. Ultra Balls and Dusk Balls remain the go-to options, but even with its health bar reduced to a sliver, the legendary bird frequently bursts free after just one or two shakes. For many, this becomes a long, drawn-out ordeal that mirrors the chase leading up to the encounter. The battle stretches on, with repeated attempts to capture it, often ending in frustration. Players must balance the risk of fainting their opponent with the risk of their own team being wiped out. Healing items pile up quickly, and the stock of Pokeballs dwindles as turn after turn slips away. What makes this encounter especially memorable is the sheer time investment required just to reach it. Unlike other legendary Pokémon that can be approached in a straightforward way, the hunt for this bird demands repeated chance sightings, endless patience, and the endurance to keep going when progress feels non-existent. It transforms the entire capture into a saga, a story of persistence and determination that few other encounters can match. For those who finally succeed, the reward is as satisfying as it is exhausting. Seeing the ball click shut and the message confirming the capture is a relief unlike any other. It's not just about adding a rare Pokémon to the collection, it's about completing a marathon that pushed the limits of patience. This sense of accomplishment is what makes the capture stand out among the hardest in Kalos. Even years later, players recall the countless hours spent wandering through the grass, waiting for the yellow flash of wings that meant another sighting. The memory of that chase, coupled with the final battle at the Sea Spirit's Den, ensures that this legendary bird remains one of the most infamous challenges of the region. For many trainers, this journey was their introduction to how unpredictable legendary encounters could be. It wasn't simply a battle of strength, it was a test of willpower, persistence, and dedication. The long chase and the final showdown carved this legendary into the memories of every player who endured it. In the grand tapestry of Kalos, it stands as one of the most grueling trials, a reminder that some of the hardest captures are not about the fight itself, but about the road it takes to even get there. Moltres has long stood as one of the most iconic legendary birds, and in Kalos, its capture became one of the most demanding trials for players who happen to select Chespin as their starter. Just like with the other legendary birds, the process of encountering this fiery figure is not straightforward. It doesn't simply wait in a cave or tower, ready to challenge any trainer who dares enter. Instead, it first appears as a fleeting presence, darting across the overworld during random encounters. These first glimpses are frustratingly brief, lasting only seconds before it vanishes without a battle. That first taste of what's to come is enough to spark excitement, but also enough to set up the long grind that follows. The rules are identical to those governing the other birds. 10 separate sightings across different routes must occur before the legendary will finally reveal its true location. Each encounter feels like a tease, a reminder of what lies at the end of this prolonged chase. The randomness of it all is what makes the process so tiresome. Trainers cannot force the appearance, nor can they predict with accuracy when or where it will happen. Hours can pass without seeing even a flicker of fiery wings. When the bird does appear, the fleeting encounter offers no progress beyond that tally toward the 10th sighting. This repetition wears down patience, leaving trainers wondering when the ordeal will finally end. When at last the requirement is fulfilled, the fiery bird retreats to the sea spirit's den in Azure Bay, the same secluded area where its siblings await. The buildup to this final battle is immense, and by the time the confrontation finally occurs, the anticipation feels almost unbearable. What follows is one of the most grueling encounters a player can face in Kalos. The dual fire and flying typing gives this opponent a deadly combination of offense and speed. Moves like flamethrower and air slash deliver punishing blows, and its natural quickness allows it to strike before most opposing Pokémon can react. Trainers who come unprepared find their team quickly falling apart, their health bars evaporating under waves of searing fire and slicing wind. The risk of burning from its fire-based attacks adds yet another layer of difficulty, crippling physical attackers and dragging out the battle even further. The process of whittling down its health requires finesse, bringing its HP into the red zone without accidentally knocking it out becomes a tense balancing act. Status moves like Thunder Wave or Hypnosis become vital, but even then, success is far from guaranteed. The capture rate for these legendary birds remains painfully low, ensuring that even the perfect setup often leads to dozens of failed attempts. Ultra Balls shake 3 times before breaking open. Dusk Balls sometimes offer hope, but still fall short, and Timer Balls become necessary as the fight drags on, turn after turn. Every throw feels like a gamble, each failed attempt pushing the trainer closer to despair. The endurance required during this encounter mirrors the patience already spent chasing it through the tall grass for hours. Trainers often arrive at the den exhausted, only to be dragged into one of the longest legendary battles of their playthrough. Healing items become scarce, Pokeballs dwindle, and the opponent continues to break free over and over again. The frustration only amplifies the relief when, after what feels like an eternity, the ball finally clicks shut. That single moment of triumph feels hard-earned, and it is remembered for years to come. What sets this capture apart in Kalos is the combination of both the chase and the battle. Neither part is inherently impossible, but together they create one of the most exhausting trials in the game. The randomness of the overworld sightings tests a player's patience, while the final confrontation tests their strategy, preparation, and persistence. To endure both back-to-back is what makes the Fiery Bird's capture stand out as one of the hardest in the region. For many, the encounter also carries a weight of nostalgia. This legendary bird has appeared across multiple generations, each time presenting a new kind of challenge. In Kalos, its appearance in the Sea Spirit's Den ties its legacy into the region's mythology, giving it a fittingly dramatic stage. The effort it takes to catch it ensures that it remains a highlight of the adventure, even if the process is remembered with equal parts fondness and frustration. By the time it is finally secured, trainers are left with a story to tell, a memory of determination that outlasts the moment itself. This isn't just another legendary capture, it's the result of a marathon that tests patience from start to finish. For those who stick with it, the fiery bird becomes a badge of perseverance, one of the ultimate trials of Kalos. Articuno is the bird that trainers encounter if they chose Fennekin as their starter, and in many ways, it represents the coldest and most grueling of the legendary hunts in Kalos. Just like its fiery and electric siblings, it does not appear in a single fixed location ready for an immediate battle. Instead, it reveals itself slowly and deliberately, forcing trainers through the same test of patience. The first time it appears is fleeting, vanishing before a battle can begin, leaving only the memory of blue wings gliding across the screen. For many players, that brief encounter is both exhilarating and infuriating proof that the hunt has begun, yet a reminder of how long it will take to reach the actual confrontation. To earn the right to battle this ice and flying type, a player must encounter it 10 separate times in the wild. Each sighting is random, with no guaranteed location. Trainers wander across Kalos, hoping to trigger the brief cutscene of the legendary bird appearing, only for it to vanish yet again. This process can consume countless hours, as the randomness works against those who are desperate to speed things up. For some, the chase becomes almost unbearable, with frustration mounting after hours of seeing nothing but common wild Pokémon. The only consolation is the knowledge that every sighting brings them one step closer to the true battle. When the 10th encounter finally occurs, the bird flees to the Sea Spirit's Den, the secluded cave in Azure Bay that serves as the final destination for all 3 members of the trio. The build-up to this moment makes the battle feel monumental. By the time a trainer finally reaches the den, the chase has turned into a saga of determination. Sitting face to face with the icy figure in its lair feels like a well-earned reward for enduring such an exhausting process. The battle itself presents its own set of challenges. With access to Ice Beam, Hurricane, and other devastating moves, Articuno is far from a passive opponent. Its ice typing allows it to strike hard against grass, dragon, and ground types, while its flying side punishes bug and fighting Pokémon. The combination of solid defenses and powerful attacks makes this fight one of endurance. Trainers who arrive unprepared quickly find their team overwhelmed, frozen, or knocked out by its unrelenting strikes. Reducing its health without knocking it out becomes a careful balancing act. Ice Beam carries the risk of freezing opponents, dragging out the fight, and forcing players to waste healing items. Meanwhile, Hurricane's high base power and chance to confuse can turn battles into chaotic struggles, especially when confusion causes allies to harm themselves at the worst possible moments. This unpredictability adds another layer of difficulty, making the capture more about patience and resource management than sheer strategy. Pokeballs often fail repeatedly, shaking once or twice before breaking open. Even with its health deep in the red and a status condition inflicted, the capture rate remains brutally low. Trainers cycle through Ultra Balls, Dusk Balls, and eventually Timer Balls as the fight drags on turn after turn. Each failed attempt adds to the tension, forcing the player to push through with dwindling supplies. It is not uncommon for this legendary encounter to stretch beyond 30 or 40 throws before finally succeeding. What sets Articuno apart in Kalos is not only the battle itself, but the sheer endurance needed to even reach it. Hours of chasing through random encounters wear down even the most patient players, making the final showdown feel like the end of a marathon. When the Pokeball finally clicks shut, the relief is overwhelming. This isn't just the capture of a legendary bird, it is the reward for a test of persistence that stretched across both the overworld and the battle itself. The difficulty of this encounter ensures that it remains etched in memory. For many trainers, catching Articuno in Kalos was one of the most exhausting achievements of their journey. The icy bird may not be the strongest legendary in terms of competitive use, but the effort required to secure it in this region makes it unforgettable. It became a story to share with other players, proof of patience and determination in the face of overwhelming tedium and difficulty. In the grand scope of Kalos, Articuno's capture highlights the region's design philosophy. Legendary Pokémon are not handed over easily. They must be earned through perseverance, preparation, and an iron will to keep going when progress feels non-existent. The bird's long and grueling chase cements its reputation as one of the hardest catches in the region, a challenge that tested not just strength in battle, but the patience of the trainer behind the screen. Mew is one of the most elusive Pokémon in the entire franchise, and in Kalos it retained that reputation as a near-mythical presence. From the very beginning of the series, this small psychic type has symbolized mystery, often hidden behind special events or promotional distributions. Unlike the legendary birds that required a physical chase across routes and countless sightings, this encounter in Kalos was defined more by exclusivity than persistence. The very act of obtaining it was, for many trainers, an achievement in itself, and one of the hardest feats in the region. The challenge with Mew was never about battling it in the wild or reducing its health to the red zone. Instead, it was locked behind rare event distributions, requiring players to either attend official gatherings, connect through time-limited promotions, or use special devices. This meant that the vast majority of trainers in Kalos never even had the opportunity to see it, let alone add it to their collection. In terms of availability, it was far more restrictive than any legendary bird, because persistence alone could not guarantee success. It required being in the right place at the right time, something beyond the control of ordinary gameplay. For those lucky enough to gain access, the encounter felt otherworldly. Holding a creature so steeped in legend carried a weight of history. Its soft, almost playful appearance masked the incredible power hidden within. As a psychic type with a nearly limitless move pool, it could learn attacks from nearly every type, allowing it to adapt to virtually any battle scenario. This flexibility made it a treasure for competitive players, but the true challenge was never about using it in battle. It was always about catching it in the first place. What made it particularly difficult in Kalos was the way these events often required external effort. Some distributions were tied to codes given out at specific stores, while others were locked to regions or online promotions. Players in certain parts of the world might never have had the chance at all. This sense of exclusivity amplified the value for those who did manage to secure it. A trainer who displayed Mew in their collection was instantly recognized as someone who had gone above and beyond, enduring the long wait or traveling to meet the requirements. Even beyond the logistical difficulty, the Pokémon itself carried an aura of challenge. With its elusive nature, it became a symbol of dedication. Trainers often traded endlessly or relied on others willing to part with theirs, sometimes offering multiple rare Pokémon just for the chance to add it to their own Pokédex. The scarcity of opportunities transformed it into one of the most sought-after creatures in Kalos, a status that has remained consistent across generations. The story of Mew in Kalos is less about a single epic battle and more about persistence in another form. While the birds required patience in the wild, this psychic type required persistence outside the game, staying updated on announcements, traveling to events, or finding trustworthy trade partners. Each of these hurdles made the achievement of owning it just as significant as enduring the 10 random encounters for the legendary trio. The sense of triumph when finally acquiring it was unlike anything else. Trainers often remembered the exact circumstances of how they received it, whether through a code, a trade, or a fleeting promotional event. The rarity of the opportunity made it a story worth telling, a memory tied not to a battle, but to the effort it took to simply obtain the creature at all. Its role in Kalos added a layer of richness to the region's roster. While some Pokémon were tied to myths of the land itself, Mew floated above it all, as though reminding players of the franchise's deeper lore. It carried the weight of being the supposed ancestor of all Pokémon, a title that made its scarcity all the more fitting. In Kalos, a region already steeped in mystery and legend, this little psychic type served as the ultimate prize, hidden behind the curtain of rarity. For trainers lucky enough to secure it, the capture represented far more than a strong addition to their team. It was proof of persistence, resourcefulness, and sometimes pure luck. The difficulty was not about low catch rates or high stats, it was about navigating the world beyond the cartridge to find the opportunity. And in that way, Mew was every bit as hard to obtain as any legendary battle, if not harder. Its presence in Kalos highlighted a unique truth about the Pokémon world. Difficulty doesn't always mean an endless fight or an impossible capture rate. Sometimes it's about patience, timing, and determination in a different form. And for that reason, Mew stands as one of the hardest Pokémon to catch in Kalos, a legend that tested not only the strength of trainers, but their ability to pursue opportunity itself. Zapdos is the legendary bird encountered by players who begin their journey with Chespin, and just like its siblings, it became one of the most grueling hunts in Kalos. From the very first time it appeared, it was clear that this electric and flying type was not going to be caught easily. The first encounter is only a fleeting glimpse with no opportunity for a battle. Trainers see the flash of wings, the spark of electricity, and then it vanishes, leaving only the knowledge that the hunt has officially begun. That small moment sets the stage for what becomes one of the longest and most tedious processes in the region. In order to reach the true battle, the player must find this bird 10 separate times in the wild, each sighting random and unpredictable. The frustration comes not from the fight itself, but from the endless wandering required to trigger its appearances. Many hours can pass, with no progress, every patch of tall grass and every flight across Kalos ending in disappointment. Each fleeting sighting is a brief spark of hope that quickly fades, reminding the trainer just how far they still have to go. The repetition grinds down even the most determined, turning what should feel like an exciting chase into a test of endurance. Only after the 10th sighting does Zapdos finally take roost in the sea spirit's den, the same destination for the other two birds. Reaching this moment often feels like a victory in itself, since it requires not just skill, but immense patience. By the time the bird is finally cornered, most players are exhausted from the endless chase, making the battle feel like a long-awaited finale. The confrontation is far from simple, with devastating moves like Thunderbolt, Discharge, and Ancient Power. This opponent has the ability to sweep through unprepared teams with ease. Its electric typing is particularly punishing against water and flying Pokémon, two types many players naturally rely on throughout their Kalos journey. This forces careful preparation, grounded allies to resist the shocks, durable defenders to weather repeated strikes, and a steady supply of healing items. Reducing its health without accidentally knocking it out is one of the key struggles. Zapdos has just enough bulk to survive for a while, but its attacks come quickly and with precision. A single critical hit can ruin hours of planning, forcing a reset. On top of that, status effects like paralysis often spread through the trainer's team, dragging the fight into chaos. One by one, allies become slower, less reliable, and vulnerable, all while the bird continues to rain down electricity. The capture rate is painfully low. Ultra Balls and Dusk Balls break open again and again, and even when the legendary is down to a sliver of health with a status condition inflicted, the odds still feel against the player. Every shake of the Pokeball builds tension, and every escape saps morale. Timer balls often become the final tool of desperation, with trainers throwing dozens before finally seeing the 3 shakes and the telltale click. What makes this challenge particularly memorable is how it spans 2 separate tests. First, there's the marathon of triggering the 10 random encounters across Kalos. Then, there's the exhausting battle itself, where the creature's power and low catch rate push players to the limit. Each phase is designed to drain patience, making the eventual capture feel like an achievement of both willpower and preparation. For many players, this legendary encounter stands out as one of the hardest parts of their Kalos journey. Unlike other Pokémon that can be simply hunted down or battled once, Zapdos demanded repeated encounters, endless wandering, and a final fight where nothing was guaranteed. It became a symbol of persistence, representing the extreme lengths required to secure the most elusive Pokémon in the region. Its place in the trio also reinforces the theme of balance in Kalos. Each starter determines which bird a trainer must chase, and each chase becomes its own grueling story. But Zapdos holds a particular reputation because of its devastating offensive power, which makes the final confrontation even more stressful. It isn't just a battle of patience, it's a fight against one of the most dangerous movesets in the trio. In the end, catching Zapdos in Kalos was not just about filling the Pokédex, it was about endurance, determination, and the satisfaction of pushing through one of the most draining hunts in the franchise. For every player who held on long enough to finally capture it, the reward was more than just a new entry in their collection. It was the pride of overcoming one of the hardest challenges the region had to offer. Moltres is the legendary bird assigned to players who chose Froakie at the beginning of their Kalos journey. The very first time it appears, it's only for an instant, a fiery silhouette soaring across the screen before vanishing without warning. That fleeting glimpse is enough to ignite both excitement and dread, because anyone familiar with this fiery bird knows what lies ahead, a hunt that rivals any of the most frustrating experiences in the series. The process is identical to the one faced when chasing Zapdos or Articuno, requiring the trainer to trigger random sightings of the bird 10 separate times before it can finally be tracked to its nest. The first few sightings are exhilarating, but as the hours stretch on and the randomness sets in, the excitement starts to dull into fatigue. Every patch of grass, every flight across Kalos becomes a gamble, and the odds rarely feel fair. Players often report spending hours without even a single glimpse, wandering from route to route with nothing to show for it. By the time the 10th sighting is achieved, it already feels like a victory, though the real challenge has yet to come. When Moltres finally settles in the Sea Spirit's den, the confrontation begins, and it is one of the most punishing encounters Kalos has to offer. Its fire and flying typing gives it access to a devastating move pool, with flamethrower and heat wave capable of overwhelming unprepared teams in just a few turns. Unlike Zapdos, which specializes in spreading paralysis, Moltres leans on raw destructive power, knocking out Pokémon before they can mount an effective counter. The added risk of burn status only adds insult to injury, reducing the attack power of physical allies and chipping away at health every turn. The strategy to face this creature requires more than just luck. Players must bring defensive walls that can withstand repeated blasts of fire, ideally with resistances to its strongest moves. Rock types are natural counters, but few have the durability to stay in the fight long without extensive healing. Water types can resist the flames, but their weakness to flying moves means they can still fall quickly if the battle drags on. Every turn becomes a test of endurance, with trainers juggling healing items, status conditions, and the constant fear of a critical hit. And then comes the Pokeball phase. Like its siblings, Moltres carries a notoriously low catch rate. Even after being weakened to a sliver of health and put to sleep, it will break free, again and again, each failed capture testing the trainer's resolve. The fiery bird's power only compounds the frustration, since every failed attempt gives it another chance to unleash destruction. Ultra Balls, Dusk Balls, and Timer Balls all come into play, with players sometimes throwing dozens before finally seeing success. The tension builds with each shake of the ball, the sound of it bursting open becoming almost unbearable after hours of failure. What makes Moltres stand out in particular is how its move pool creates one of the most stressful legendary battles in Kalos. It punishes mistakes harshly, often wiping out underprepared teams before they can recover. Combined with the grueling requirement of 10 random sightings beforehand, it becomes a two-stage challenge: the endless patience of the chase, followed by the overwhelming power of the fight itself. Trainers who underestimated either phase quickly learned just how unforgiving this legendary could be. The memory of finally capturing Moltres is one that stays with players long after their Kalos journey ends. Many recall the exact moment, the number of failed attempts, or even the specific Pokeball that finally succeeded. For some, it was a timer ball after what felt like an eternity. For others, it was a stroke of sheer luck, catching it on the first or second throw after hours of preparation. Regardless of the method, the sense of triumph was universal. Securing this fiery bird felt like overcoming one of the steepest obstacles the region had to offer. Moltres also reinforced Kalos's theme of choice and consequence. The starter selected at the beginning of the adventure determined which bird would haunt the trainer later on, and for those who picked Froakie, the consequence was a chase and battle defined by fire. That connection tied the starter's early joy to a late-game trial of endurance, creating a sense of narrative balance across the journey. The difficulty of capturing this Pokémon in Kalos was more than just a test of mechanics. It was a trial of patience, strategy, and persistence. It forced players to plan carefully, endure long stretches of randomness, and survive one of the most punishing battles in the game. For many, it was the single hardest challenge of their Kalos playthrough, a memory etched in frustration and ultimately triumph. In the end, Moltres was not simply another entry in the Pokédex. It was a symbol of persistence and determination. Those who endured the endless chase and conquered the fiery battle earned more than just a legendary bird. They earned the pride of knowing they had overcome one of the toughest tests Kalos could throw their way. Articuno is the legendary bird tied to those who chose Fennekin as their starter, and much like its siblings, Its role in Kalos is remembered for how frustrating and time-consuming the hunt became. The first time it appears is only a shadow on the screen, wings gliding overhead for just a moment before disappearing. That one glimpse is enough to spark anticipation, but also dread, because every trainer knows what follows: a marathon of randomness that tests patience more than almost any other legendary encounter in the region. The requirement to see this icy bird 10 times in the wild before unlocking the final battle is already a punishing system, and for many players, it became a process that dragged on far longer than expected. Hours of wandering from route to route yielded no progress, every corner of grass feeling like it might contain the next sighting, but often ending in nothing at all. The first few encounters brought excitement, but by the fifth or sixth, most were drained of energy, stuck in an endless cycle of searching. Each appearance felt less like a reward and more like a reminder of just how much further there was to go. When the 10th sighting finally came and the legendary took roost in the sea spirit's den, the sense of relief was palpable. Yet that relief quickly gave way to a new challenge: the battle itself. Articuno's ice and flying typing made it one of the most punishing opponents in Kalos, with access to moves like Ice Beam and Hurricane that could devastate an unprepared team. Ice Beam, in particular, hit with precision and had the chance to freeze, turning battles into even more stressful affairs. Trainers who relied on dragon types or grass types found themselves at a severe disadvantage as their allies fell one after another to the chilling blasts. Preparation became key to surviving this encounter. Steel types were some of the best options to absorb the icy damage, but even they were not immune to the repeated punishment from Hurricane. Rock types could exploit the creature's weaknesses, yet many lacked the durability to hold out for long. Every team had to juggle resistances, healing, and careful move selection just to keep the fight going without a total collapse. The looming possibility of status effects frozen Pokémon, unable to move, or confusion from Hurricane made every turn a gamble. And then came the true struggle: the capture itself. Like its siblings, Articuno carried a notoriously low catch rate, turning the battle into a long war of attrition. Ultra Balls and Dusk Balls often shattered without even a single shake, while Timer Balls became a lifeline the longer the fight dragged on. Some trainers reported throwing well over 50 attempts before finally securing success. The tension of watching the ball shake once, twice, then break open became almost unbearable after dozens of failures. By the end, players were drained, their supply of items nearly exhausted, their patience tested beyond reason. The rarity of this encounter was not just in the low capture rate, but in the two-phase ordeal it demanded. The random sightings already pushed players to the limit, but the actual fight layered another grueling test on top of it. The combination made Articuno one of the hardest Pokémon to obtain in Kalos, not because of any single overwhelming feature, but because of how many obstacles stacked together. From the endless wandering to the freezing blasts, it was a trial that left its mark on everyone who attempted it. Beyond the mechanics, this legendary bird carried symbolic weight as well. Choosing Fennekin meant committing not only to a fire-type starter, but also to the icy punishment of this late-game trial. That connection tied the player's earliest decision to one of their hardest challenges, creating a sense of narrative cohesion across the journey. Trainers who picked Fennekin were effectively choosing to face Articuno long before they knew what it would entail, making the eventual battle feel like destiny. For many, the capture of this Pokémon became a story told with pride. Players remembered exactly how long the search lasted, how many Pokeballs they threw, or which unlucky ally finally fainted to a critical ice beam. These details became part of the memory, the frustration transforming into triumph once the legendary was finally secured. The Pokedex entry became more than just data. It became proof of persistence, patience, and determination. Ultimately, Articuno stood as one of Kalos's greatest challenges, a reminder that legendary encounters were meant to push players beyond their limits. It demanded time, strategy, and a level of endurance not every trainer was prepared for. But those who succeeded gained not just a rare Pokémon, but the satisfaction of overcoming one of the region's harshest trials. Mew has always been one of the most mysterious creatures in the entire franchise, and in Kalos, that reputation remained as strong as ever. From the very beginning, players understood that this tiny, pink figure was unlike anything else they would encounter on their journey. Unlike the legendary birds, or even the more obvious mythical giants of the region, Mew was never waiting in a cave or flying across the map. Instead, it was locked behind special events, distributions, or trades, making it one of the hardest Pokémon to truly obtain in the 6th generation. The difficulty with Mew wasn't about wandering the grass for hours or surviving a punishing battle filled with status effects and powerful moves. Instead, its challenge came from something far more frustrating: accessibility. If a player missed the distribution period or didn't have access to Nintendo's online services at the right time, their chances of adding Mew to their collection were effectively zero. This reality left countless trainers feeling shut out, especially those who joined the games later, or who simply weren't aware of when and how the special events took place. The rarity of the opportunity became the barrier, a challenge that no amount of grinding or strategy could overcome. For the lucky few who managed to participate in these events, capturing Mew was an entirely different kind of experience. Its design was deceptively simple, small, light, and unassuming, yet the history that surrounded it added enormous weight. This was the original mythical, the creature that tied back to the very foundations of the series, hidden deep in the earliest coding of the 1st generation games. That legacy made every appearance in Kalos feel like a moment of history repeating itself. Holding it in a Pokeball was not just about having another entry in the Pokedex, it was about possessing a piece of Pokemon's mythos. The battles themselves, when they happened, were not necessarily about overwhelming power. Mew's strength lay in its versatility, its ability to learn nearly any move, and its uncanny unpredictability. Facing it meant preparing for anything from powerful psychic attacks to unexpected coverage options. It could be defensive, it could be aggressive, or it could simply stall out the opponent until frustration set in. The lack of a clear strategy made it one of the most difficult opponents to predict, and trainers often had to rely on adaptability rather than rigid planning to succeed. But even for those who succeeded in capturing it during the event battles, the rarity of the opportunity itself made it feel like a privilege. Players who obtained Mew often carried a sense of pride, sharing it in trades or showing it off as a badge of honor. This created a divide in the community, those who had it and those who could only look on with envy. Unlike most legendary Pokémon in Kalos, where patience and persistence could eventually guarantee success, Mew stood apart as something unattainable for many, no matter how much effort they put in. This exclusivity created an aura of mystery that fit perfectly with the character of the Pokémon itself. Mew had always been associated with the origins of life and DNA, the hidden foundation upon which so much of the series was built. Its rarity in Kalos only amplified this legend, making it feel less like a collectible and more like a secret whispered from one trainer to another. Stories circulated about who had managed to get it, how they had done so, and whether or not it could even be legitimately obtained outside of the official events. For players who missed out, there was often a lingering sense of loss. The Pokédex in Kalos felt incomplete without that elusive entry, and no amount of trading common Pokémon could fill the gap. Some turned to online trades, searching desperately for someone willing to part with their event Mew, but such generosity was rare. More often, offers were met with absurd demands, multiple legendaries, rare shinies, or entire teams just to obtain one. The difficulty of securing it through trade became another layer of frustration, adding to the sense that Mew was a Pokémon locked away behind nearly insurmountable barriers. Yet this scarcity also created one of the strongest emotional payoffs in the series. Trainers who did manage to add it to their team carried a sense of accomplishment that few other Pokémon could inspire. It wasn't just about catching it, it was about being present, aware, and lucky enough to participate in the right place at the right time. That combination made the moment unforgettable, a story every trainer would carry with them long after their time in Kalos had ended. In many ways, Mew represented the ultimate test of patience and timing rather than skill. It challenged players not with difficult movesets or overwhelming strength, but with scarcity itself. That scarcity was what made it one of the hardest Pokémon to obtain in the Kalos era, and also what made it so treasured by those who managed to secure it. Its presence in the Pokédex was more than just a number. It was proof of being part of something rare, something few others could claim. Ultimately, Mew's place in Kalos was less about the grind of searching or the endurance of battle, and more about the sheer difficulty of opportunity. It was a reminder that some Pokémon are designed not to be common victories, but once-in-a-lifetime experiences. And for those who carried it with them, it wasn't just another legendary. It was a story of persistence, timing, and luck that would never be forgotten. Zygarde was one of the most unusual and challenging creatures tied to the Kalos region. While most legendary Pokémon were defined by straightforward encounters, find the cave, endure the battle, and eventually succeed, this serpent-like guardian was shrouded in mystery from the very beginning. Players first heard whispers of its existence through hints in the story, cryptic dialogue, and Pokédex entries that suggested it served as a watchful force, keeping the balance of nature. But the path to obtaining it was anything but straightforward. Unlike the legendary birds, or even the mighty Mewtwo, Zygarde did not immediately present itself in a climactic cutscene or dramatic chase. Instead, players had to search deep within Terminus Cave, a labyrinth of twisting corridors and dead ends. The cave itself felt intentionally designed to wear trainers down, forcing them to battle through endless wild encounters while constantly second-guessing their direction. Each turn seemed to loop back into another, and without a clear map, many players wandered in circles for hours. It was a test of endurance before the true battle even began. When trainers finally stumbled into the chamber where Zygarde waited, the encounter did not play out like an ordinary fight. This Pokémon was level 70, making it one of the strongest opponents in the region right from the start. Its dragon and ground typing gave it access to devastating moves like Earthquake and Dragon Pulse, each capable of tearing through unprepared teams. Trainers who underestimated it often found their teams wiped out in just a few turns. Preparation was critical, and even the best strategies were pushed to the edge by its sheer power. The difficulty of catching Zygarde was not only in its strength, but also in its unpredictability. Unlike other legendaries that had obvious weaknesses, this Guardian's typing covered so much ground that many common strategies fell apart. Flying types crumbled to dragon attacks, while steel types that resisted one move often collapsed to another. Even bulky water types, usually reliable walls, risked being overwhelmed by earthquake. Trainers had to design teams specifically around surviving long enough to bring it down into the red without fainting themselves. And then came the capture rate. Like the other legendaries, Zygarde had one of the lowest possible odds of being caught, making each attempt a painful gamble. Pokeballs shattered again and again, leaving players with the constant fear that their inventory would run dry before the battle ended. Timer balls became the weapon of choice the longer the encounter dragged on, but even then, success was far from guaranteed. Many players reported battles that stretched well past 20 minutes, with dozens of failed throws before the moment of triumph finally arrived. What made Zygarde's challenge even more frustrating was its narrative role. Unlike Xerneas or Evatail, which were tied directly to the main story, this legendary was largely hidden in the background. Players could easily finish their journey through Kalos without ever realizing it was there, meaning those who did pursue it often felt like they were stumbling into something secret, almost forbidden. That sense of mystery made the capture all the more rewarding, but it also meant that countless trainers missed out entirely, never knowing what lay hidden in Terminus Cave. In later generations, Zygarde would become infamous for its multi-form mechanic, splitting into cells and cores that players had to track down across vast regions. But even before those mechanics were introduced, its Kalos appearance carried that same energy of fragmentation and complexity. It wasn't a straightforward prize handed out for finishing the main quest. It was a puzzle, a hidden trial that only the most dedicated players were likely to complete. That level of secrecy made it stand apart from nearly every other legendary of the time. The emotional weight of finally capturing this Pokémon was enormous. Trainers often described the sense of shock when the ball finally clicked, as though they had achieved something that tested both their patience and their persistence. The victory wasn't just about adding another entry to the Pokédex. It was about proving their ability to endure a trial that most would never attempt. The story of Zygarde in Kalos wasn't one of flashy cutscenes or scripted drama, but of personal determination and discovery. The difficulty of Zygarde lies not just in the battle itself, but in the entire journey leading to it. The endless wandering through Terminus Cave, the repeated defeats at the hands of its overwhelming moves, and the dozens of failed Pokeball throws combined to create a memory that few players would ever forget. For many, it wasn't even about whether Zygarde was the strongest addition to their team. It was about the fact that they had endured the ordeal at all. In hindsight, this legendary serves as a perfect representation of what makes Kalos's roster of difficult captures so unique. It wasn't about handing players victories through story progression. It was about offering hidden challenges that only the most persistent could claim. Zygarde's role as a guardian of balance fit perfectly with that design, existing not for everyone, but for those willing to go the extra mile. And for the players who did, the memory of that battle remains one of the hardest, most rewarding captures in all of Kalos. Xerneas is perhaps the most recognizable legendary of the Kalos region, a creature of elegance and power whose role in the story ensures that every trainer will eventually face it. As the symbol of life itself, its presence carries immense weight. But what truly makes the encounter memorable is how difficult it can be to capture. Players expecting a straightforward addition to their team quickly learned that this was not the case. This was one of the hardest trials Kalos had to offer. The battle takes place in Geosenge Town, within the chamber that Lysandre awakens during the climax of the story. By this point, tension is already at its peak, as the player has fought through the villain's army and seen the devastation of the ultimate weapon. When Xerneas appears, it does so not as an optional challenge hidden away in a cave, but as the centerpiece of the entire narrative. This legendary is unavoidable, and that fact alone changes the experience. It must be caught, or the game cannot continue. That requirement turns what should feel like an honor into one of the most stressful capture attempts in the series. At level 50, Xerneas is not the highest leveled legendary in Kalos, but what sets it apart is its fairy typing combined with access to powerful moves. Moonblast is its signature attack, striking with high damage and the chance to lower special attack, making it dangerous to drag the battle out too long. On top of that, it has Hornleech, which not only hits hard, but also restores health, undoing the careful chip damage trainers rely on to prepare it for capture. Each time Hornleech healed back a chunk of its HP, the frustration grew, forcing players to start the process all over again. Fairy typing itself posed a serious problem. In Generation 6, Fairy was a newly introduced type, and many players were still adjusting to its strengths and weaknesses. Longtime strategies built around dragons were completely invalidated here, as Moonblast cut through them with devastating ease. Pokémon that normally served as late-game sweepers were suddenly liabilities, leaving trainers scrambling to find alternatives. Steel and poison types could resist fairy moves, but not every team carried them, making the fight feel lopsided from the start. Even with the right counters, the low catch rate turned the battle into an endurance test. Ultra Balls and Great Balls broke repeatedly, with success rates feeling insultingly low even after the opponent's health was reduced to a sliver. Status conditions like paralysis or sleep helped, but only marginally. Some trainers resorted to using their Master Ball out of sheer frustration, unwilling to risk spending hours on a single capture. For those who insisted on saving the Master Ball, the process often became one of the longest and most exhausting in the entire game. The emotional impact of the encounter cannot be overstated. This was not just another legendary hidden in a post-game dungeon. It was the core of the Kalos story, the living embodiment of balance against destruction. Catching it wasn't about filling the Pokédex. It was about deciding the fate of the region. That wait turned every failed Pokéball into a reminder of what was at stake, raising the pressure with each passing turn. Few players walked away from the battle without remembering exactly how long it took, how many items they spent, and which teammates fainted in the process. Adding to the frustration was the fact that Xerneas' design made it feel almost too majestic to fight. The glowing antlers, the vibrant colors, the sense of power radiating from its stance, all of it contrasted sharply with the image of repeatedly throwing Pokeballs and watching them shatter in failure. For many, the dissonance between the beauty of the moment and the grind of the capture became one of the most surreal parts of the game. What made this encounter stand out even further was the sense that the player had no choice. Optional legendaries like Mewtwo or Zygarde could be postponed indefinitely, approached only when the trainer felt ready. But here, the story forced the moment. Whether a player had prepared or not, they had to face Xerneas, and they had to succeed. That lack of control made the challenge even more intense, especially for younger or inexperienced trainers who hadn't fully stocked up on Pokeballs or thought carefully about their team composition. For them, the battle wasn't just hard, it was overwhelming. Once the capture finally succeeded, the sense of relief was unlike anything else in Kalos. Trainers often remembered the exact Pokeball that succeeded, whether it was an Ultra Ball on the 37th attempt or a Timer Ball after what felt like an eternity. That single moment of victory erased hours of frustration, turning the ordeal into one of the most rewarding memories of the game. Xerneas didn't just join the team, it felt earned. A prize wrestled from the jaws of one of the hardest encounters in the region. Looking back, the trial of catching Xerneas remains one of the defining moments of Pokémon X. It wasn't just about battling a legendary, it was about adapting to an entirely new type, managing a fight where healing moves dragged things out, and enduring a capture rate designed to frustrate. More than anything, it was about proving resilience under pressure, because there was no skipping this one. For better or worse, every trainer who completed their Kalos journey carried the memory of this battle with them. Rotom is not the first name that comes to mind when players think of difficult captures in Kalos, but those who pursued it in Pokémon X and Y know the frustration that came with its strange method of encounter. Unlike many legendary or mythical Pokémon, this one required patience, persistence, and a touch of luck, all wrapped in a mechanic that was both creative and exhausting. To even begin the hunt, players needed to enter the Lost Hotel, a location tucked away and easy to miss on a casual playthrough. The setting itself set the tone, a decrepit, maze-like building filled with roller skating trainers and trash piles that created a gloomy atmosphere. For most, the first trip through the hotel was about clearing battles and collecting items, but hidden within was the possibility of meeting Rotom, a chance encounter that required not just effort, but also a bit of stubbornness. The mechanic at play was unusual. Rotom appeared through certain televisions scattered throughout the hotel, but only on specific days of the week. That restriction alone meant that most players had to return repeatedly, often only to be met with disappointment. Entering the room, interacting with the TV, and seeing nothing happen became a ritual of frustration. Many trainers wasted entire in-game weeks cycling through time, waiting for the one day when the odds would finally line up in their favor. When the screen finally flickered and the encounter began, the relief quickly turned into a different kind of stress. At level 30, Rotom was not particularly powerful, but its ghost and electric typing, combined with disruptive moves like Confuse Ray, made the battle unpredictable. Many teams were not fully prepared for an opponent that resisted common types and punished careless moves with confusion damage. Trainers who underestimated the fight often found themselves in trouble, not because of overwhelming power, but because of the sheer annoyance of battling it. The capture itself was another hurdle. With a low catch rate and an unpredictable battle style, Rotom could drag fights out for far longer than expected. Ultra Balls repeatedly failed, and even Great Balls, which many younger players relied on, rarely got the job done. Status conditions like paralysis or sleep helped, but even then, it often took over a dozen attempts to succeed. Watching the Pokeball shake once, twice, then break open became a recurring cycle, wearing down patience with each failed try. Another factor that made this encounter frustrating was the timing. By the point Rotom became available, many trainers had already filled their teams with powerful allies. To go out of their way for this tricky capture often meant breaking up a balanced lineup, forcing them to weigh the effort of adding it against the stability of what they already had. For completionists, of course, there was no choice. Rotom was required for the Pokédex, but for others, the question of whether it was worth the trouble only made the process feel heavier. Beyond the capture, Rotom carried additional complexity through its unique ability to change forms when exposed to household appliances. In other generations, these forms gave it new typings and movesets, making it a versatile ally. But in Kalos, unlocking these forms was a post-capture ordeal, one that required further searching and experimentation. For trainers who struggled just to obtain it, the thought of doing more work afterward made the entire experience feel daunting. The rarity of this Pokemon's appearance also contributed to its reputation. Legendary encounters like Xerneas or Articuno were guaranteed in their storylines, but Rotom was missable, hidden behind layers of obscurity. Players who never thought to return to the Lost Hotel might go their entire playthrough without even realizing it was there. That sense of exclusivity gave the capture an almost mythical quality, with those who succeeded feeling part of a smaller, more dedicated group of trainers who had gone the extra mile. Adding to the challenge was the psychological weight of the encounter. Because the opportunity to meet Rotom was limited by in-game days, every failed attempt to catch it carried more sting. Fainting it by accident, running out of Pokeballs, or letting it faint from recoil damage meant waiting another week or manipulating the in-game clock, which many players either didn't know how to do or refused to attempt. That layer of waiting turned mistakes into massive setbacks, heightening the tension of the battle. Over time, Rotom became known as one of the more irritating but rewarding captures in Kalos. It lacked the raw power of the region's legendaries, but the hoops required to obtain it made it stand out. For many, the moment of finally seeing the television flicker and entering the battle became one of the most memorable moments of their playthrough, not because of the thrill of victory, but because of the grind it took to get there. In the end, Rotom's place among the hardest Pokémon to catch in Kalos comes not from overwhelming strength, but from design. The rarity of its appearance, the randomness of its timing, the unpredictability of its battle style, and the grind of its capture all combined into an experience that tested both patience and persistence. It was a trial of endurance more than anything else, and for those who endured, the reward was not just another entry in the Pokédex, but the satisfaction of overcoming one of the most unusual hurdles the region had to offer. Yveltal stands as the embodiment of destruction in Kalos, a counterpart to the life-giving presence of Xerneas. From the moment it appears in Pokémon Y, it is framed not just as a legendary creature, but as a force tied to the very end of life itself. This reputation alone set expectations high, but it also meant that the eventual encounter was one of the most intense and stressful experiences a trainer could face. The battle begins with cinematic weight. The setting, the music, and the lore all combine to create a moment that feels less like a simple wild battle and more like a clash with destiny. Yet behind the spectacle lies a fight that pushed many players to their limits. Its dark and flying typing, paired with devastating moves like Oblivion Wing, left even experienced trainers scrambling for strategies that could hold up. Oblivion Wing in particular turned the battle into a nightmare. The move not only dealt heavy damage, but also restored health, undoing progress and stretching the battle far longer than most trainers could handle. Watching Yveltal recover half of the damage it inflicted was a crushing sight, as every successful strike from the player seemed undone in a single turn. Teams that lacked strong, electric, or rock-type coverage found themselves locked in an uphill struggle. constantly trying to balance survival with the slim chance of whittling its health down to the point where a Pokeball attempt was even possible. Adding to the challenge was its high level. By the time the encounter came, many trainers still had teams that struggled against such raw power. Even Pokémon that were well prepared could be crippled by repeated dark-type attacks or knocked out by flying-type coverage. The battle was not just about tactics, but about endurance, with healing items and status moves becoming essential tools to stand a chance. Sleep and paralysis were often the only ways to buy enough time for capture attempts, but setting those conditions up was risky, as Evatail could strike back with devastating force at any moment. Then came the Pokeballs. Like most legendaries, its capture rate was painfully low, turning the fight into an extended test of luck. Ultra Balls clattered uselessly against its dark form again and again, while Dusk Balls, despite their bonus in dark places, often failed after long stretches of battle. Timer Balls were perhaps the most reliable option, but they required enduring dozens of turns under relentless pressure. Trainers often threw more than 50 attempts before finally seeing the ball click shut. The battle could last upwards of an hour, draining both items and patience in equal measure. The lore surrounding Evatail added another weight to the capture. According to Kalos legend, when this creature's life comes to an end, it absorbs the life force of every living thing nearby, retreating into a cocoon of destruction. That narrative made the encounter feel more than just mechanical. It carried a symbolic gravity. To catch it was not just to secure a powerful ally, but to contain a force of annihilation itself. For many players, this lore made the battle even more nerve-wracking, as if feinting it or failing to catch it might somehow unleash its destructive potential. Another layer of difficulty came from its exclusivity. Unlike the legendary birds, which could be found in both versions of the game, this creature was locked to Pokémon Y, with Xerneas being the counterpart in Pokémon X. That exclusivity meant players had only one chance to capture it per save file, raising the stakes considerably. There was no second chance if things went wrong. Accidentally knocking it out, running out of Pokeballs, or saving at the wrong time could mean losing access to it altogether without restarting the game. That looming risk made every turn feel even more dangerous, as mistakes carried consequences that stretched far beyond the battle itself. For completionists aiming to fill the Pokédex, or competitive players looking for a top-tier legendary, Evatail was non-negotiable. Its stats and moveset made it one of the strongest Pokémon available, with a unique ability to recover health while dishing out heavy damage. Owning it was not just a matter of pride, but of utility, yet obtaining it required weathering one of the hardest captures in the entire Kalos region. The psychological strain of the battle cannot be overstated. Trainers often described the encounter as exhausting, not just for their in-game characters, but for themselves. Watching a rare capture slip away after an hour of effort, seeing the Pokeball burst open after 3 shakes, or losing half a team to a critical Oblivion Wing left scars that stuck long after the game was turned off. Yet, those who finally succeeded felt an unmatched sense of accomplishment. The moment the Pokeball clicked shut, after what felt like an eternity of setbacks, was one of pure triumph, a relief so great it often overshadowed even the battle itself. Ultimately, Evatail's reputation as one of the hardest captures in Kalos is well earned. It was not just about the numbers coded into the game, but about the atmosphere, the stakes, and the pressure it created. It stood as a wall that tested persistence, strategy, and luck all at once. And for those who overcame it, The victory was more than just another legendary caught, it was a conquest over destruction itself. DNC is the jewel of Kalos in more ways than one. Where other legendaries wait in caves or soar across routes, this one never appears in the wild at all. It arrives only through special distributions, brief windows, codes, or promotions that many trainers never saw, and that scarcity is what makes it one of the hardest additions to any Kalos collection. From the moment players learned it existed, the challenge wasn't, how do I weaken it, but how do I even get a chance? That single twist changes everything. There's no path to memorize, no puzzle to solve, no reset after a fainted encounter. The work happens outside the cartridge, watching announcements, visiting stores on specific dates, redeeming a code before it expires, hoping your region even gets the giveaway. Miss the window and the door closes. For a lot of players, that was the end of the story, no matter how prepared they were in-game. The mythical remained a rumor they could only admire in screenshots. For the lucky ones who did secure a distribution, a different kind of pressure kicked in. Collection mechanics in this era delivered special Pokémon via a delivery NPC. Accepting the gift was easy. Accepting it with the right nature, characteristic, and IV spread was not. Because the gift is generated when you talk to the delivery person, perfectionists sat at the Pokémon Center doing quiet, repetitive work. Receive, check, soft reset, repeat. Hours vanished in a loop of polite text boxes and appraisal screens, all for the chance at a nature that wouldn't hobble a glittering attacker in future battles. It's a funny memory, now hunting a gemstone by standing perfectly still, but that's how the hardest Kalos challenges often felt. Rarity drove demand, and demand shaped the trade scene. One code or gift copy per save file meant scarcity by design. If you missed your chance, the only hope was another player, and that brought its own gauntlet, proving legitimacy. Communities compared summary screens, languages, original trainers, dates, ribbons, anything that could hint at a counterfeit. People learned to spot inconsistencies because the market was awash with too good to be true offers. The mythical wasn't just a prize, it was a trust exercise. Even securing a trade could feel like a boss battle of negotiation, patience, and detective work. Lore magnified the mystique. This is the miracle evolution of a carbink, a prism-born sovereign cut from pressure and time. Everything about the presentation suggests rarity: faceted crown, weightless skirt of crystal, a presence that looks less caught than presented. In Kalos, where fashion, elegance, and spectacle shape the region's identity, this fits perfectly. It feels like the celebrity the runway can't book, the headliner who only appears for one night. Then there's the competitive hook. Base form blends high defenses with a dual rock, fairy typing that flips matchups on their head, and a signature move that can bolster defense mid-fight, gives it a stubborn core role. But the real magnetism comes from the evolution that arrived with Hoenn's remastered era, a mega transformation that trades bulk for breathtaking offenses and speed guarded by magic bounce. Suddenly, hazards bounce back, status turns around, and a once stoic gemstone becomes a glass rapier. That power spike is precisely why players in Kalos schemed to future-proof their gift, why nature mattered, why IVs mattered, why painstaking resets at the delivery counter felt justified. Owning it wasn't just about the present, it was about potential. Even without megas, the practical obstacles kept stacking. Some distributions were region limited, some were store limited, some were time limited to a comically tight window. Travelers carried systems on trips just to redeem a code. Friends coordinated across borders. Families made weekend errands to game shops part of a quest. Plenty of trainers did everything right except learn about the event in time. The mythical turned calendars into battlegrounds. Its one-per-file nature raised the stakes in a way that a cave-dwelling legendary never could. If you faint Zygarde, you reset and try again. If you accept the gift with a nature you don't want and then save, there's no wild habitat to return till your decision is crystallized. That permanence made careful players slow down and triple check before pressing the button that commits a lifetime gemstone to its first stat sheet. It's a quiet kind of difficulty, not reaction time, not puzzle solving, but stewardship under pressure. Even training it carried its own flavor of friction. A symmetrical stat spread in base form can make early choices feel muddy. Is this a wall, a pivot, a setter? Do you lean into bulk for story content or bank on eventual transformation for speed and offense? Move tutors, TMs, and natures each nudge the arc of a very limited resource. With only one copy to their name, many trainers tucked the mythical into a box rather than risk ruining it, promising they'd build it perfectly later. Later has a way of never arriving. And then there's memory. The way this particular prize etches itself into a trainer's personal timeline. People remember the exact shopping mall where they picked up the code, the friend who messaged them the moment a giveaway went live, the evening spent soft resetting beside a charger while a show droned in the background. Other legends remind you of battles. This one reminds you of logistics. That's not less meaningful, just different. The story lives outside the screen as much as within. Ask around, and you'll hear the same refrains. Someone missed the redemption end date by a single day. Someone else got the gift, but spent all night fishing for a timid roll they never caught. Another traded a clutch of shinies to a stranger who ghosted right after. A few timed everything perfectly and still felt their hands shake the first time they finally saw the summary page line up just right. That spread of outcomes is exactly why this jewel sits so high on Kalos's hardest list. The friction wasn't about perfect execution in a cave. It was about 100 small points of failure in the real world. All of which is why, when it does work out, the feeling is special. The sprite twirls, the summary sparkles. You slot it into the party, and it changes the vibe immediately, less beast-tamed, more crown bestowed. If you later unlock the mega transformation, the first-time magic bounce reflects a status or hazard back across the field is a tiny thunderclap. Power has a different texture when it was this hard to secure. In a region defined by style, wonder, and theatrical reveals, this mythical is the perfect closer. It's rare by design, glamorous by nature, practical in battle, and unforgettable in the way you got it. The region gave you birds to chase and titans to unearth, but saved one treasure for appointments only. If you were there and you claimed it, you carry proof of timing, patience, and a little luck. Some honorable mentions for the Kalos region deserve a spotlight too. They may not be as infamous as the main legendaries and mythicals, but each of them presented unique challenges that tested trainers in their own way. One of the more surprising choices comes in the form of Durant, the ant Pokémon. At first glance, this small steel-coated insect hardly seems like a difficult catch compared to the titans of Kalos like Xerneas or Evatail. Yet anyone who has hunted for it knows how frustrating the experience can be. In Kalos, Durant appears deep within the wilds, tucked away in areas that don't always make exploration simple. Finding it is already a challenge, as its encounter rate is lower than many of the creatures that share its habitat. Hours can pass with only the faintest hope of seeing that flash of silver scuttle across the screen. When the battle finally begins, trainers are met with another layer of difficulty. Despite its small frame, Durant is far from defenseless. Its steel typing gives it strong resistance to many common moves, forcing players to get creative in how they whittle down its health. Moves that would easily bring down other wild Pokémon often barely scratch its metallic armor. Worse, because of its bug typing, it resists grass attacks as well, making false swiping strategies harder to pull off without careful planning. The result is that even experienced trainers end up in battles that stretch much longer than expected. Durant is also fast, surprisingly so. Its speed stat means it often strikes first, landing hits before the trainer's Pokémon can even react. While its offensive power isn't overwhelming compared to legendary Pokémon, the constant chip damage adds up, draining resources and wearing down the player's team over the course of repeated encounters. In some cases, it even feints the very Pokémon meant to set up status conditions like sleep or paralysis, undoing careful strategy in an instant. Adding to the frustration is its tendency to break free from Pokeballs far more often than it feels like it should. The numbers behind its catch rate make it one of the more stubborn, non-legendary Pokémon to capture. Trainers who came unprepared with only a handful of Ultra Balls often found themselves forced to run back to a Pokémart, restock, and try again. For those attempting to complete the regional Pokédex, this single ant could turn into a multi-day ordeal, a creature far harder to obtain than many of the region's larger, more intimidating species. For shiny hunters, Durant becomes an even greater challenge. Its shiny form, a subtle shift to a more muted tone, requires thousands of encounters in the worst-case scenarios. Every failed attempt stretches patience thinner, and when one finally appears, the stress of making sure it doesn't faint or flee adds to the already tense battle. One wrong move, one accidental critical hit, or even the frustration of a self-destructive struggle could end hours of effort in a blink. Despite its size, Durant gained a reputation among completionists as a wall in the Kalos journey. It was not legendary, it was not mythical, and it was not even especially rare in lore, but mechanically, it stood as a sharp reminder that difficulty doesn't always come wrapped in grand battles or dramatic music. Sometimes, it came in the form of a stubborn little ant that refused to stay in the ball. This blend of rarity, resistance, speed, and sheer stubbornness made Durant an unforgettable part of many trainers' experiences. It may never stand among the legendary icons of Kalos, but for those who faced it head-on, its reputation as an unexpectedly hard catch is well-deserved. When discussing the most difficult creatures to obtain in Kalos, Furfrou might not be the first name that comes to mind. On the surface, it looks like a charming, fashionable dog with a variety of haircuts that make it more of a stylist's dream than a competitive battler's nightmare. But looks can be deceiving, and when it comes to capturing and raising one, Furfrou presents its own unique hurdles that frustrate even seasoned players. The first challenge lies in its availability. Unlike many common normal-type Pokémon that seem to appear on every early route, Furfrou does not always show up in convenient places. Trainers searching the tall grass often find themselves wading through encounters with creatures that appear far more frequently. When it finally does reveal itself, relief quickly turns to frustration as the battle begins. For one, Furfrou is bulkier than it looks. Its signature ability, Fur Coat, halves the damage it takes from physical moves. This means that strategies involving false swipe or other physical attacks, normally the go-to for catching wild Pokémon, suddenly become unreliable. Instead of neatly dropping its health to 1 point, trainers often find themselves stuck, chipping away slowly, risking accidental critical hits or the target fainting before the capture can happen. What seems like a straightforward encounter often stretches into a drawn-out test of patience. Adding to the problem is Furfru's tendency to resist status strategies as well. Sleep-inducing moves miss more often than one would like. Paralysis doesn't always stop it from attacking, and confusion is more likely to backfire. The frustration comes not from overwhelming offensive power, but from the sheer endurance that makes every attempt feel longer than it should be. Many players underestimate it the first time, wasting valuable Pokeballs in the process before realizing that proper planning is essential. The catch rate itself adds insult to injury. While not as low as legendaries, it still feels disproportionately stubborn for a normal type without any mythological importance. Trainers have shared countless stories of Furfru breaking free from Ultra Balls again and again, even at red health and under status effects. The wasted resources add up, especially for younger players who might not have the money in-game to restock easily. For them, this supposedly stylish canine quickly becomes one of the least enjoyable encounters in the entire region. What truly cements Furfru's reputation as a frustrating capture, however, is its appeal to collectors and completionists. The multiple grooming styles available in Kalos mean that many players didn't stop at just catching one, they wanted every possible trim. While the different looks didn't count separately in the Pokédex, they represented a kind of personal challenge, a collection goal that required not only patience, but time and effort spent at grooming shops. For shiny hunters, the challenge intensified even further. The odds of finding one in its alternate coloration were already low, but combined with the grooming gimmick, players chasing the dream of a shiny Furfru in every trim often described the process as nothing short of grueling. Another factor is how deceptively ordinary it seems compared to the legends of the region. When you face off against something like Articuno or DNC, you expect the battle to test your limits. But when a normal type dog becomes one of the hardest things to catch and collect, it leaves a different kind of impression. Many players walked away remembering Furfru not for its elegance or style, but for the hours wasted in pursuit of something that, on paper, shouldn't have been such a challenge. In the competitive scene, Furfru never lived up to much. Its defensive ability made it situationally useful, but it lacked the raw stats to shine at higher levels of play. That fact only made its reputation in the wild more infamous. Trainers would grumble about how much trouble it caused to add to the Pokédex, only to later realize it didn't even have the battle potential to justify the effort. This combination of being hard to catch but not rewarding in the long term left many fans with mixed feelings. For all its style, Furfru remains one of the most deceptive encounters in the Kalos region. It looks simple, it looks easy, yet hidden beneath its fur is a layer of resistance and stubbornness that made it one of the most aggravating captures in the game. That disconnect between its image and its reality cements its place as a worthy, honorable mention among Kalos's hardest Pokémon to catch. Some honorable mentions wouldn't be complete without including one of the strangest and most elusive mythical creatures tied to Kalos Hoopa. Unlike many Pokémon that could be tracked down in the wild or unlocked through story events, this one was bound to special distributions, making it nearly impossible to obtain without being in the right place at the right time. For many trainers, that meant simply missing out entirely, and even today, the rarity of this mysterious figure continues to frustrate players who wish to complete their collections. Hoopa stands out because of its dual forms, with the smaller, confined version being the one distributed most often, while the massive, unbound version represented a hidden power that few trainers ever got to wield firsthand. The problem wasn't just the exclusivity, it was that the unlock methods varied depending on where you lived and which version of the game you owned. While players in some regions could access official events, others were left with no options at all. This uneven access turned what should have been an exciting challenge into one that felt unfairly limited by geography. For the few lucky enough to receive it, the challenge did not end with simply downloading the gift. Hoopa's presence raised questions of legitimacy, since many fakes and hacked versions circulated online. Trading communities were flooded with imposters, and distinguishing a legitimate Hoopa from a fraudulent one became almost as much of a challenge as catching a legendary bird in the wild. Players who prided themselves on a pure collection often found themselves torn between accepting a questionable trade or leaving a blank spot in their Pokédex forever. The lore surrounding Hoopa only added to its allure and difficulty. In the in-game world, this creature is associated with powerful rings that can bend space and summon legendary Pokémon from other places. Such a concept made it feel like one of the most important mythicals of its generation, but the reality of acquiring it was much more mundane. Waiting for limited time events or trying to track down codes through retailers lacked the thrill of venturing into a hidden cave or facing down an unpredictable battle. That disconnect between lore and reality deepened the sense of frustration among fans. Even once acquired, Hoopa could still present difficulties. Unlocking its unbound form required a special key item that was itself tied to events, and without it, trainers were stuck with the smaller version. This meant that even those who managed to secure one didn't always get to experience the Pokémon in its most powerful state. As a result, Hoopa became a symbol not just of rarity, but of incompleteness, a reminder of what players couldn't have, even when they technically owned it. For shiny hunters and collectors, the situation was even worse. With no legitimate shiny distribution during the Kalos era, anyone claiming to have one was immediately suspect. The combination of hacked shinies and event-only access turned Hoopa into a Pokémon that was almost impossible to pursue legitimately. Many collectors accepted that this was simply one they would never have, which made it stand out as one of the hardest to truly obtain in the region. Another layer of difficulty came from the competitive scene. Hoopa Unbound had one of the most dangerous offensive profiles of any mythical, with immense attack and special attack stats. Those who faced it in battle often struggled to counter its raw power, but that only added salt to the wound for those who couldn't get one legally. Knowing that such a powerful tool existed but remained out of reach made it all the more painful for fans outside of distribution zones. Looking back, what sets Hoopa apart is the way it represents a different kind of challenge compared to the legendary birds or creatures like Xerneas. Instead of requiring patience, strategy, or endurance in battle, the difficulty of Hoopa lay in real-world barriers. It wasn't your skills as a trainer being tested, it was your location, timing, and sometimes sheer luck. That kind of exclusivity makes it stand out as one of the most frustrating creatures to collect, not because of how hard it fought in-game, but because of how hard it was to even get access to the fight in the first place. As an honorable mention, Hoopa earns its place not by the number of Pokeballs it broke free from, but by the countless fans it left empty handed. It is a reminder of how Pokemon distribution has sometimes limited access to content in ways that go beyond the game itself. And for many, it remains one of the hardest to truly obtain in Kalos, not because of difficulty, but because of its rarity, its event only nature, and the uncertainty that came with every trade. Catching Pokemon in Kalos was never just about strength or patience, it was about persistence and sometimes plain luck. From legendary titans to event only mythicals, the region tested trainers in ways both inside and outside the game. Even with every challenge, the thrill of the hunt is what keeps these stories alive.